This week, President Donald Trump said he'll launch an investigation into what he calls widespread voter fraud in the 2016 election. The president won the electoral vote but lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by nearly 3 million ballots. Trump maintains the difference was votes cast illegally, despite having no evidence or reports of voter fraud from election officials in any of the 50 states. He repeated the claim Wednesday in an interview with ABC News.
What you have presented so far has been debunked. It's been called false.
Take a look at the Pew reports.
I called the author of the Pew report last night, and he told me that they found no evidence of voter fraud.
Really? Then why did he write the report?
He said no evidence of voter fraud.
Excuse me. Then why did he write the report?
For a closer look at the issue of voter fraud and where an investigation might lead, we're joined by Richard Briffault. He's a professor of election law at Columbia University Law School. Professor, good morning.
Morning.
Let's talk about that Pew study, which the president cited, which is from 2012. It did find millions of people who might be incorrectly registered, right?
That's right.
But did it actually find any reports of voting fraud?
Not at all. It wasn't the focus, but the focus of that study was on, in some sense, the problems in our voter registration system. That we do have people who move, they get new registrations in a new state, but their old registration isn't canceled. So there are, and they also pointed out that there are many people who are eligible to vote who aren't registered. It was really focused on, you might call them sort of bureaucratic problems, serious bureaucratic problems in the voter registration system, but no evidence of fraud.
And some of those folks who have double registrations appear to actually maybe even be in the Trump White House.
Yes, there have been some news reports about that, yes.
Professor, the president also tweeted about an alleged study that shows 3 million votes cast illegally on Friday. What do we know about that report?
We know just about nothing about that report, actually, as to what the data is, where the evidence is, what states it may have occurred in. What do we mean by illegal voting? It's that the authors of that study have pretty much kept it close to the vest and just sort of said, we have a study, and here's what it shows. But normally when you have a study, you produce the study and you share with other people to give them a chance to poke holes in it. I mean, that's the way kind of knowledge advances, is the way you present your information, and other people come back and sort of say, well, this makes sense, this doesn't. They're not doing anything like that with that so-called study.
What would an investigation into voter fraud look like?
It's hard to say. I mean, there actually have been investigations into voter fraud, quite a number. The Bush administration was very concerned about this around the time of the 2004 election, and they sort of created a special task force in the Justice Department. They tasked a number of their U.S. attorneys to especially focus on this. They weren't able to find any cases. And indeed, the criminal division of the Justice Department, which looks for this, over a 10-year period between 2004 and 2014, they didn't find any. The kind of voter fraud that people are talking about when they use the term voter fraud, it covers a lot of ground.
Yes.
Generally means somebody showing up at the polling place and saying, I'm somebody who's falsely claiming to be somebody who's actually registered there. There's almost no evidence that ever happens. It's hard to pull off a major fraud that way.
Yeah.
It's too obvious. Sometimes individuals make mistakes and they think they're registered and it turns out they're not. Sometimes the administrators make a mistake. You register under your full name and you show up and sign in with your nickname, or you leave out your middle initial and they say you're not the same person.
So evidence of voter fraud is vanishingly rare, and yet 31 states have voter ID laws. Are we headed to a national policy on voter ID laws, and what are the implications of that?
Well, that might be one thing that the administration is pushing for. So you're talking about, when you say voter ID, you're actually it's these photo IDs. Many states require voters to prove in some sense who they say they are and that they live where they live. They live in the district where they're voting. Yeah. But you can satisfy that sometimes with a signature match. You can satisfy that with presenting a rent bill or utility bill. The more stringent rule is to have some government-issued photo ID. That was fairly uncommon requirement until about 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, there's been a big push for that. Candidly, it's primarily in states with Republican governments.
And the problem is there are, of course, a lot of people who don't have government IDs.
That's right.
They might not have a driver's license or something like that. All right, Richard Briffault, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.